Hello everyone, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are looking at the paper English Literature from 1590 to 1798, and we shall be looking at the module on Ben Jonson, paying particular attention to his play Volpone. I am Anna Kurian and I teach at the Department of English, the University of Hyderabad. First of all, a brief introduction to the life of Ben Jonson. Now, Renaissance drama, leaving aside Shakespeare, is still full of several major dramatists whose work continues to be read, acted, performed across the globe. Ben Jonson is one of them. Even if Shakespeare had never lived, Jonson would still have been a major dramatist of the period. Jonson was born in 1572. And he went to school where he was taught by a classical scholar, and this gives us the reason for some of his great pride in believing that he knew better Latin and Greek than Shakespeare did. He served briefly in the British Armed Forces, and finally, of course, he joined the theatre. Now, he came from a fairly humble background. He was son to a bricklayer, and for a brief time, he served as a bricklayer. He was apprenticed to his father. But after that, he went into the armed forces, and then, of course, he joins the theatre and in Philip Henslow's company. Now, Philip Henslow's company was a rival company to Shakespeare's company. Now, he begins writing plays, some of them successful, some not so successful, but the early years of his career are known more for the kinds of trouble that he ran into. Like Marlowe, he seemed to have an adventurous life. So he killed a co-actor. He authored a seditious play, went to jail for it, spent some time over there, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of activity in Jonson's life, which was not restricted only to the theatre. His first major success was Every Man in His Humour, a comedy of humours, which is what Jonson is primarily famous for. This and the city comedy is what he is famous for. And Every Man in His Humour was performed by the Chamberlain's Men in 1598 and attained huge success. Now, one of the characteristics that distinguishes Jonson's work from that of other playwrights of the period was the fact that he did not write the kind of loosely put together play that others did. Instead, his were based upon the classical model, and he went according to the dictum of Aristotle that they should observe the unities of time, place, and action. So all of the action took place in a single day, and it took place in one location only. So they're not like the plays of, say, Shakespeare or Marlowe, which move from country to country, sometimes country to continent, different continents, and then come back to the original country. Instead, they all are located in one town, sometimes even one room, sometimes one house, and their action takes place in one day entirely. Via his comedies of humours, Jonson then also satirized the common follies of the people around him. And this is again something that is significant and exclusive, more or less, to Jonson, because his comedies are savagely satirical. He did not see people as forgivable in what the wrongs that they committed or in the hypocrisies that their lives were. So he satirized them, and he satirized them severely. They're also extremely funny, but that is, of course, by the way. What is crucial is the fact that he saw people's immorality, lack of kindness, and so on and so forth, and then he put them up on the stage and mocked them. He started writing plays of this sort, but then in between his career fell off for a while, and during that period he decided that writing masks was the way to go. And during this period is when he gets the patronage of James I. He found favor with royalty. His masks were played out in the court of James I and his wife, Queen Anne. And in fact, Anne participated in masks such as the Mask of Blackness. Now, his most successful plays, apart from Every Man in His Humour, and later on he had a sequel to it, or a follow-up to it, which is called Every Man Out of His Humour. But apart from those, his most successful plays were Volpone, written in 1606, The Alchemist in 1610, and Bartholomew Fair, 1614. And all of these are satirical plays, interestingly not always set in England, and yet satirizing contemporary British society. There is speculation as to whether Jonson can be considered the first poet laureate of England, and this is because the royal court, James and Queen Anne, they gave him an annual pension in 1616, and therefore then he is said to be the first poet laureate of England. Now, Johnson is also interesting because though his work declined, the quality of his work was not seen as great in the later years of his life in the 1620s and thereafter. Johnson was still seen as this heroic figure in the world of letters as well as the world of the theatre, and he continued to be a major influence on a whole bunch of young poets and writers, and they call themselves the Sons of Ben or the Tribe of Ben. So a lot of writers who then found him their inspiration and their mentor. We also see Ben Jonson significant in one other fashion, and that is because he is the first man, the first playwright who decides that his own plays are worth publishing. So he got a complete works of Ben Jonson published at his own expense and during his own lifetime. This is not something that was common practice during the period. In fact, most people considered plays to be ephemeral. Johnson did not, so he got everything published during his own lifetime. We move on now to a plot synopsis of Volpone. Volpone is set in 17th century Venice. Now, Venice itself as a setting is significant in a lot of plays and appears in a lot of plays of the period. We, of course, can think of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice as one example, but there are also others, such as Othello, which also begins in Venice and then later on, of course, moves to an island, Cyprus. But when you look at Volpone, Volpone is set in 17th century Venice, and all the incidents take place in the life of the eponymous character Volpone himself in a single day. Now, all the characters in the play are named after insects or birds or flies or animals. So Volpone is the fox, his servant is the fly, Mosca. And they are setting up a story by which they are deceiving three fortune hunters, Corbaccio, Corvino, and Voltaire, and they are trying to cheat them out of their money. Fascinating to say, these three fortune hunters are themselves extremely rich, and it is their greed that motivates them to then go along with the schemes of Volpone and Mosca, because they believe that Volpone will die soon and he will leave his fortune to one of these three because he has no heirs of his own. This is, of course, all a story because Volpone is not that old, he's not that ill, he's not going to die. It's a story which is put out by Mosca the servant so that these people will come daily to visit him, and in the process they bring him very expensive gifts. That's how the play begins. We see Volpone and Mosca waiting for Corbaccio, Corvino, and Voltaire to come so that they can then present their gifts of the day. And these gifts go into Volpone's coffer, making him richer and richer. The three men, of course, Corbaccio, Corvino, and Voltaire, believe that this will eventually come to one of them. And so they compete with each other to give the richest and the best possible gifts to this old man, Volpone the fox. We see them coming, we see them giving gifts, we see their greed, and then soon after that we see Volpone being seduced by the description of Corvino's wife, Celia. And that is also when we realize that he's actually not as old as he pretends to be or as ill as he pretends to be, because then he goes out dressed up as a mountebank. He sells these false medicines, calling himself Scotto of Mantua. He goes to where Corvino's house is, and then outside Celia's window, he has a performance, and then he sees Celia. But once he's seen Celia, he is then completely consumed by lust for her, and he decides that he must have her. And therefore, he says to Mosca that it is Mosca's job to get her to his house and into his bed. Mosca is equal to any task, and so of course he tells Volpone that it's not a problem, he will see that it is done, and he convinces Corvino that if he will let his wife Celia sleep with Volpone, then it is guaranteed that Volpone will make him his heir. Similarly, they also set up another set of stories wherein Bonario, Corbaccio's son, is brought to the house, but this is because Corbaccio is told that if he disinherits his son, then Volpone will make him his heir. So Corbaccio in his greed decides that this is the way to go, and he says fine. But Bonario is brought to the house by Mosca so that he can see it, and then there will be a fight, because this is also Volpone and Mosca's way of entertaining themselves. So Bonario is already in the house when Celia is brought by her husband to be given to Volpone. Celia, of course, resists. She fights, he tries to rape her, and at that point Bonario then jumps out from where he's been hiding, and he says he rescues Celia, and they decide that they will go to court about this. But just in time, Mosca makes one more plan. So as you can see, it's Mosca who makes the plans over and over again, both for the entertainment of his master Volpone, but also for enriching him and to save him when trouble arises. So then now he sets up a new plan that they will accuse Bonario and Celia of being lovers, and therefore then the master Volpone will be saved in the court of law. And Voltaire, the third of the three people who are courting Volpone to get his riches and his wealth, is a lawyer. So he is the one who defends Volpone in court. There is a small subplot where you have Lady Politic, her husband, Politic would-be, and Peregrine, who all three of them also show us how English travellers behave when upon the continent. And Mosca tricks them as well, because Lady Politic also comes to Volpone hoping to become his heir and is even willing to sleep with him for this reason. So he tricks Lady Politic into believing that her husband is cheating on her with a courtesan, and therefore then Lady Politic leaves Volpone and goes away. Then of course you have a courtroom scene, and there Volpone behaves like this really old and ill man who cannot obviously do anything, let alone try to rape a girl. So he is acquitted, and Bonario and Celia are to be punished. And Volpone could at this point then maybe have lived happily ever after, except that he decides he has to have some more entertainment. So he decides one more trick, which he will play on the three people whom he is cheating or whom he is gulling. He tells the story that he is dead and he wants to see the legacy hunters come to his house and become his heir. And then he wants them to be told that it is Mosca who is going to inherit all his fortune. At this point, of course, things begin to fall apart, because Mosca decides if he is going to get all his fortune, he would really like to get all his fortune. So he decides then that he will not step back and he will take the money that will be coming to him because of Volpone's so-called death. At this point then, what we have is Mosca announcing the fact that Volpone is dead. The three fortune hunters come to find out which of them has been made the heir, and they discover that it is Mosca who is the heir. Volpone is of course hiding in the background, falling around with laughter, because they are so unhappy and they are so angry because of what has been done. But then Mosca decides that he will keep up the act, because then he can get Volpone to part with half his fortune to him. Once again, they go back to court, because Volpone is so angry with Mosca that he says he will go to court and fight it in court. So he tells the whole story in court, all of it. And that is when justice is finally served, because the judges then sentence him and Mosca to imprisonment. And the three fortune hunters as well are given their punishment, especially Corvino and Corvecchio. Corvecchio because he was going to disinherit his son, Bonario, and Corvino because he was willing to make his wife sleep with somebody else, all for the sake of money. So Celia and Bonario are finally given a lot of money. So Celia returns with her dowry trebled to her own father's house. Bonario is given his father's fortune, and everything ends with justice being given to all those who are greedy, all those who were avaricious, and all those who played upon the passions and the gullibility of others. So what we see then in this whole story is a series of intrigues, and it's all dramatically compressed because all of this happens in a day. So there are 2 visits to the judge, there are several visits to, of course, Volpone's own house, and a lot of action which takes place through the course of the play. It's frenzied, the action, but all of it also then shows us how this frenzy is a result of excessive indulgence, of course, of great greed and the desire for material pleasures. And for this to be corrected, then something has to be done, and that is how the plot then finally ends. We will now look at the art of characterization in Jonson's work, and this is particularly important because Jonson built his characters around a theory that was prevalent at the time, a theory of bodily fluids which was called the theory of humours. Now, the theory of humours believed that all characters have a certain predominant humour, which is based upon the theory of which bodily fluid in them has a greater presence in their body. So the 4 bodily fluids which they refer to are black and yellow bile, blood and phlegm. So depending on which you have more of, your character will be determined by that. So if you have a lot of blood in you, you will be cheerful and you will be more optimistic and so on and so forth. Whereas others might be, a person who has more phlegm in him will be more calm, more deliberate in his ways, rather than somebody who is sanguine or somebody who has more of black bile or yellow bile. Now they are governed by one humor, basically. What we see in the play is that all of these characters, Volpone, Mosca, Corvino, Corbaccio and Voltaire, are all of them governed by one humor primarily, and that humor is greed. But we are also given another indication as to how they are, and that indication is given to us by their names. Their names, all of them, are from the animal world. So Volpone is a fox. Now foxes are supposed to be cunning. Mosca, of course, is a fly. Flies live upon other creatures or live upon dead things or eat dirty things. And Mosca that way is seen to be a fly. Corvino, Corbaccio and Voltaire are all birds, but they're not pleasant birds, they're not songbirds. Corvino is a crow, Corbaccio is a raven, and Voltaire is the vulture. So these are then birds which prey again upon rotting things, dead things, and they are things which are not at all positive or pleasant in any fashion. So what we say is that the names indicate one kind of a person, and the humor in the play is already indicated by the fact that they are all pursuing only one aspect, and that aspect is greed. Greed for material pleasure and enormous wealth. So even minor characters like Sir Politic would be his wife, and there is a Sir Peregrine who's not actually one amongst this lot, but even those are shown to be vain and affected, and therefore of course deserving of ridicule. We have two good characters, Bonario and Celia, and their names themselves indicate that as well. Bonario means good, and these are people who are virtuous. They are also kind of like water, because you don't see their character at all in the play, except that they are uniformly good. They don't have any evil in them. They are also naive in the sense that they don't know how to cope. They don't even see the evil that is there in their father/husband, and they don't recognize it even when it is shown to them. So they are unable to defend themselves against the unscrupulous characters like Volpone and all the rest of them. Now, the basic story which begins the play and which is sustained through a lot of the play, that intrigue, it exposes the unscrupulous nature of both himself and the other characters. So we see that the other characters are of course greedy. That is why they come wanting to become his heir. But he also is greedy because he wants to get more and more things from them. The other indulgence that Volpone has is his desire for entertainment and pleasure. And this we see right from the beginning, because the play begins with Mosca and Volpone talking, and it goes on to an entertainment which is presented by a bunch of people who are said to be Volpone's children. There is a hermaphrodite, there is a eunuch, there is a dwarf, and so on and so forth, and they do an entertainment for him. So Volpone's main aim in life is entertainment. He wants to have a lot of fun, and therefore we see greed as being not just greed for material possessions, but also greed for entertainment, an appetite which can never be fulfilled for either money or for pleasure. Now we'll go on to look at the themes of the play. Now, the predominant theme of course is avarice. Avarice, which can also be codified as greed, and which afflicts most of the characters other than Bonario and Celia. Now, alongside the theme of avarice, there are also the themes of disguise and of ignorance, of appearance and of reality. And these are all connected to the theme of greed, because it is what they do for the sake of their greed that leads to these other themes as well. They disguise themselves, they are ignorant of the schemes that are being hatched, and there is the constant disjuncture between appearance and reality. We also see within the play the falsity of appearances, and this we can explore a little bit in detail, because the falsity of appearances depends also upon what they pretend to be and what they actually are. And this you see most of all, of course, in Volpone and Mosca. Volpone, who, when the play opens, is full of life, but once the three suitors come to present their gifts, he descends into his bed and he becomes this really old, ill man who Mosca says is about to die, will die any moment. So there is the appearance that he presents, and there is the falsity of that appearance which fools everybody else around him. Similarly, Volpone also then puts on a disguise when he goes out to meet Celia, when he wants to see Celia, having heard of her tremendous beauty and her great charms. When he goes out to meet Celia, he dresses up as a mountebank, that's a peddler of as a peddler of medicines which are basically false, which don't work. Once again, medicine which is supposed to heal people, which he is actually giving out, is something which is useless. So he goes out once again, you have appearance and reality both in terms of his disguise. And the fact that he just goes out and is able to put up a performance also gives the lie to his previous performance. And finally, when you have the last one where he does this is when he pretends to be dead. It's again a disguise. He is playing dead so that he can have some more entertainment. Actually, he's hiding so that he can see the three guys come in and then fight over who will be the heir, and then they get the news that Mosca will be the heir. So what we have is Volpone himself exemplifying how disguise works and how disguise then fools people, and the truth, the reality of the person can be constantly hidden away behind these appearances that they put on over and over again. One other significant factor which we can see in one of the characters, Corvino, is that he presents the appearance and has till this point presented the reality of being a very jealous husband. He is not willing to let Celia step out of his house without lots of servants so that everybody can see that she is a good woman and she doesn't look at anybody, and he doesn't let her go out unless she is veiled, and so on and so forth. He even does not let her appear at a window so that people can see her, because he's so jealous of her. And yet the reality of that is he's willing to let her sleep with Volpone if it will make him wealthier or it will make him the heir. So there is this constant mismatch between what is real and what appears to be real amongst all the characters. And these are deceptions that characters use to fool one another. So even Celia is fooled by her husband. She is unwilling to believe that he would give her to another man just because he wants to be wealthy, because till that point she has always known him to be this jealous husband who is very careful of his own honor and therefore of her honor as well. That how dangerous greed can be is of course the central moral story, the central moral thematic of this entire play, that greed is destructive, and while it destroys others, it is also eventually destructive of the self who is greedy, is something that the play then demonstrates via the lives of Volpone, Mosca, the other three people as well, Corvino, Corbaccio and Voltaire. All of them are destroyed because of their greed. While they believe that their greed will make them wealthier, will make them more respected in society, eventually what happens is that each of them is destroyed because of the fact that they could not restrain their greed to healthy levels. So Volpone is finally then stripped of his honorable place in the Society of Venice, and he is sent away to a hospital or infirmary for incurables. Mosca is of course sent to prison. Voltaire is stripped of his lawyer's degrees and he is no longer allowed to practice law in court. Corvino loses all his wealth, and his wealth is given to Celia, and she goes back to her father's house with much more money than what she came from there. And Corbaccio loses all his wealth to his son, whom he was planning to disinherit. So there is also this idea of poetic justice, that the evil that they were planning to do to their children, to their wives, to themselves, all of that evil is played back upon them, and finally they are left with nothing. Now, if society is seen as a place where evil and good live side by side, the Venetian society of the play shows us that when there are people such as Volpone and Mosca and all these other people, then good people, people who are honorable, decent, living their own simple lives, people such as Bonario and Celia, they will be threatened, because there is a scene in between where justice is not served, where Voltaire argues that Volpone is so old that he could not have raped Celia, and so on and so forth. And at that point Celia and Bonario are made out to be lovers, and then they are also sentenced to imprisonment and so on. So people who are decent cannot live in a society which is full of deceitful, self-serving people. Now, it also examines, of course, the lack of trust, loyalty, love in interpersonal relationships. What is important in these relationships, and as we can see, father and child, husband and wife, master and servant, all of these relationships are based upon trust and loyalty. All of these relationships need to have a certain amount of fidelity if they are to be successful and if they are to be happy. Now, what we see in the play is that all these relationships are built not upon trust, love, affection, and so on and so forth, but are built upon greed and a desire to play upon the worst aspects of the other person's character. So Mosca succeeds and thrives because he is able to make Volpone happy by doing all the nasty, wicked things that Volpone likes. Similarly, Volpone is happy because he is able to make Corvino, Corbatio, Voltaire, all of them behave in their worst possible manner, not necessarily in their best possible manner. So interpersonal relationships in the society that Volpone depicts, the play depicts, are seen to be governed by what is worst rather than what is best in terms of the human. And it is all because of material gain. So we are also once again being told that the personal does not matter. What matters is how much wealth you can get for me. All of Johnson's plays, to a very large extent, give us social commentary upon the time and upon the people. Now, though this is set in Venice, we also know that he is attacking the kind of society that was there in Britain, in England, in London during this period. And the satire that he wreaks upon the people of Venice within the play is also a satire that is seen to be directed at the people in England itself. Now, Venice, of course, has a different standing as well. Venice during the early 17th century and the late 16th century was the hub of all trade. It was also a place of immense, enormous wealth. Now, this wealth made people greedy, immoral, etc. All the things that we see within the play. And so Venice, which is the center of all corruption, is then shown to be perfectly similar to London in the early 17th century. Because London in early 17th century is also a place where people were beginning to like wealth for the sake of wealth. There was a lot of social mobility, there was a lot of upward mobility, trading classes. The traders were becoming more prosperous, they wanted a higher standard of life for themselves. And the aristocracy, which had always had enormous wealth, was beginning to open up so that even traders could then gain some footing in that society. And because James I needed a lot of wealth, he would sometimes give titles to people who were wealthy because in return he got money. So this whole anxiety that is there about social mobility, about class structures in British society during this period is reflected in this play where everything is in flux, nothing remains stable. And instead what we see is a lot of movement, and all that movement is governed by how much wealth I can make out of any given person at any given time in the play. Then, while we might think that all the characters, Corvino, Corbatio, Voltaire, Volpone and Mosca, are governed by greed and avarice, that this is only because they are in themselves morally weak, so that it's a sign of their individual weakness rather than a reflection of society at that time, is given the lie to because you only see two decent people within the play. Everybody else is like that. So then what we see is that it is not about one person being wicked or being weak or being evil. It is about a society which has been rendered corrupt and which is driven by greed and lust all the time. So there is, when you look at it, the three people who are being tricked by Volpone and Mosca, is there any real difference between them? And the answer is sadly enough, no. There is nothing good about Volpone. In fact, Volpone can be seen to be slightly, not slightly more evil, but just as evil as they are. They are willing to sacrifice, Corbatio is willing to sacrifice his son, Corvino is willing to sacrifice his wife, his marriage. So, Volpone is willing to sacrifice everything to get somebody else's wife into his bed, and he's willing to rape her as well. And that's where everything, of course, descends into chaos. It's not just that he wants her, but that if she proves unwilling, he's willing to step back. No, it's that even if she's unwilling, he will rape her, but he wants his will. He wants what he desires. So what we see is that there is nothing to choose between Volpone and Mosca on the one side and the other three characters who are being gulled or cheated on the other side. All of them are driven by this lust for material possessions. But what distinguishes Volpone and Mosca actually eventually is the fact that they are far more intelligent and imaginative than the others. The others get fooled because they lack the intelligence that Volpone has. Actually, what we see is that there is also, Johnson does this very interesting class shift where Volpone is the one who is a dignitary of Venetian society, but it is Mosca who is more intelligent and more imaginative than him as well. And he is the one who eventually is able to trick Volpone. And it is his greed then, if greed drives everybody, then all of them are defeated by their greed, including Mosca, but it is Mosca who is most superior in his intelligence and imagination. Now, of course, you also have the moral conclusion that we are given at the end of the play, that here is a play wherein the good are rewarded, the evil are punished. Poetic justice happens, which is wonderful and which is good, and nobody actually regrets the fact that all these people get the punishments that they deserve and that Bonario and Celia get the good things that they deserve in life. So you have a very grim society that is being portrayed here. It's not a happy place that is being portrayed here. Instead, you're being shown a world where everybody is corrupt. And the two good people that you do see are exceptional, not the rule. In fact, there is also in the first court scene when Bonario and Celia are being accused of being lovers and Volpone is being shown as so sick and so dying that he obviously could not do anything to Celia. There are these really bad scenes as well and dialogues as well, where even the judges in the court are interested in getting some wealth. So when they see Volpone dying, they're like, we also have daughters. Would you be interested? Because then they could also have a share in the wealth. So everyone in the society is seen as being wicked, greedy, and lustful for material pleasure or material prosperity, and nobody is therefore then good apart from these two characters, Bonario and Celia. So the selfishness of the wicked governs the entire play, and there is no personal fulfillment. This is something which is striking, that we don't see Celia going away happily with the usual romantic comedy ending where marriage is working once again. Instead, we see her going back alone to her father's house. She has lots more money, but that's about all that she has. Bonario similarly will have a lot of money, but he does not have personal fulfillment. So you see the wealth being distributed, they have material prosperity, so the reward for the good is not that they live happily, but that they get prosperous. That is all there is. There is no personal happiness that comes because of goodness within the world of the play. We've been looking at Ben Jonson's Volpone, and we've been talking about the various aspects of the play. We looked at the themes, the characters. We of course summarized the play, and we also talked in brief about the fact that it's a socially critical play, and this should remind us that the Restoration writers of the comedies in later years would have been inspired then by Jonson's comedy of humours as well. Thank you very much.